everybody. Welcome to Race Talk Revolution, where your voice matters. I'm your host and founder of Race Talk Revolution Incorporated, Reverend Lane Cobb, and I am here today with my co-host, Mr. A.J. Woodson, editor-in-chief of Black Westchester Magazine and co-host of People Before Politics Radio. Our topic today is best practices for educating Black and Brown children. Our panel of experts includes Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman and Dr. Alexandria Connally. Dr. Ali Coleman is co-founder of Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars, LLC, and Dr. Connally is founder and CEO of Culturally Responsive Environments and Discipline, otherwise known as C.R.E.A.D. Joining us a little later on this broadcast will be U.S. Congressman and founder of Cornerstone Academy for Social Action, New York State Representative Jamaal Bowman. He's going to be speaking to us today about his Green New Deal for Public Schools initiative, which combines multiple movements for educational, environmental, and economic justice. As always, during our conversation today, we ask that you remain muted. And when we get to the Q&A section, we'll tell you how to raise your hand. Today, in the interest of time, we might actually recommend that you put your comments and questions into the chat, and AJ and I will voice those questions to our panelists, or they will answer them for you directly. And if we have time to ask people to unmute, we will do that. As always, we remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and lived experiences so that they can explore the nuances of race and racism in the United States while growing together to exercise our capacity for anti-racist activism. Here on Race Talk Revolution, we practice radically inclusive love. And that means even when we don't agree or understand what someone is sharing, we listen with empathy and respect and compassion, because it is our commitment here that every person is encouraged and heard and appreciated, because here on Race Talk Revolution, every voice matters. So today, what I'd like to do is just briefly read the bios of our speakers. I recommend that you follow them and read their much more extensive bios on their websites. Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman, Ed.D, is a cultural curator, community organizer, nationally recognized speaker, and multi-genre writer. As an educator, she has created and led educational programs for over 20 years at numerous institutions, including Montgomery Community Media, Covenant House, Washington, the Alliance of Concerned Men, One Common Unity, Morgan State University, and the University of Maryland. She is the founder of the multidisciplinary arts group Liberated Muse and co-founder of the National Education Research Group, Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars, LLC. She has maintained the youth development blog, So Our Youth Aspire, since 2006. She currently serves as the executive director of the Hurston Wright Foundation. Welcome, Dr. Ali Coleman. Dr. Alexandria Connally has dedicated herself to empowering students and improving the quality of education for all children. She began her career as a milieu therapist at a residential treatment facility. During this time, she provided professional development for faculty members in the areas of therapeutic crisis intervention and sanctuary schools, a trauma-informed model, restorative practices, athletic-based counseling, and positive behavioral interventions and supports. Later, Alexandria became the assistant principal of a residential school and an in public school district of New York. Excuse me, I'm going to try that again. Alexandria became the assistant principal of a residential school and in a public school district in New York. Currently, she serves as the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Innovation of the Nyack School District. Alexandria has devoted her professional life to ensuring equity in education. Dr. Connally is the founder and CEO of Culturally Responsive Environments and Discipline. Trained by Dr. Bryant Marks, Alexandria serves as an implicit bias consultant for NTIRE, N-T-I-R-E. Additionally, she is a certified restorative practice trainer and has expertise in culturally responsive pedagogy. In August 2018, Dr. Alexandria Connally successfully defended her dissertation entitled In Pursuit of Equity, Does the implementation of culturally responsive positive behavioral interventions and support have an effect on the racial suspension gap? I love that topic. I would love to read your dissertation. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to be with us today. And I'm going to turn the microphone on to AJ Woodson, who is going to conduct our interview this morning.
Aha. Welcome, ladies. Definitely blessed to have you both on the show. I want to start off, I have a question for Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman.
You can call me Khadijah.
Okay. I wanted to hear more about the homeschooling Black children in the U.S. You know, especially at a time where we're looking at the whitewashing of our history, period, but especially Black history, and we're not taught about ourselves in our school. How important is homeschooling Black children in the U.S.?
So it's really interesting because I would say COVID-19 in 2020 was probably the biggest PR agent for homeschooling, because many believe that this is something new. And it's so interesting because in 2020, March 13th, 2020, I was defending my dissertation, which is titled Dual Enrolled African American Homeschool Students and Their Perceptions of Preparedness for Community College. And when I came up with that topic, you know, my doctoral program is higher education, community college leadership. And so many of my advisors and faculty, like, what? Homeschool what? And the reason why it was a choice for me was because in teaching college and also being a schooling parent, but in teaching college, a lot of my students were dual enrolled and many were homeschooled. And what was significantly obvious was that there was very little conversation to us as faculty, very few support services, very little recognition of this population of students, which in my experience were more often prepared when they showed up in the classroom than other students. And what was interesting is that they were typically younger than the population that was in the class. And being dual enrolled means that in addition to being in the college course, they were also still in high school. And so the literature around dual enrolled students and homeschooling students is very low if we're comparing it to education research in general that focuses on students in traditional spaces. And when I use traditional spaces, I'm talking about private, public, and charter schools, okay? And so the very limited research in comparison, but then when we look at Black homeschooling students in particular, it's even less, so much so that there's one researcher who comes up all the time when you look on research on Black homeschool students, and that's my co-editor, Cheryl Fields Smith, because she has been the researcher who has been able to conduct this research, because she's an education researcher who often compares the success or looks at homeschooling Black children in comparison to her work as an education scholar in traditional school spaces. She trains teachers. And so I give all of this backstory because in 2020, I literally, that week, if you all recall, was before we went into quarantine, because we went into quarantine on March 16th. So I defended my dissertation on March 13th, was contacted the day before, Khadijah, you can't come to school to defend your dissertation because the campus is shut down, all right? And so, as you know, all of the schools started having to transition to a virtual learning environment. And what we found in 2020 was that it was very challenging for traditional school spaces to pivot into this virtual learning environment, because these strategies, these classroom teaching strategies, weren't always conducive. A virtual learning environment isn't not conducive to what teachers are traditionally experienced with when it comes to classroom management, facilitation, and what have you. And so what was getting lost in the process was, the process of assessment, children and families not having the devices to be able to connect virtually. And so when we speak of this learning gap or learning loss that they talk about was happening during COVID, it really had a lot to do with this failure to pivot successfully. So what a lot of parents were finding out was that homeschooling was an easier choice, because what it did, it allowed for them to take ownership of teaching their children without being penalized for not being able to transition with the school that was transitioning during this period. And what came out of this period in 2020, the data that came out last year said that homeschooling among Black students in particular increased 500%. So where before, loose data kind of said that out of all homeschooling population, 5% were Black students. In 2020, it became 15%, right? And that because of that, folks started thinking that homeschooling is new, this new. But for those of us, I homeschooled off and on for 13 years. And I graduated my daughter last year from our homeschool. Is that this culture of homeschooling for Black families in particular has always been in response to the school's failure to really meet the holistic needs of their child. And while at the forefront, it's these issues of systemic racism, things that are inherent in our institutional systems in this country in general. What we also find is that, and my colleague who's going to speak, Dr. Connally, I'm sure can speak to more about the inequities when it comes to penalties, really penalizing young people for behaviors that are normative behaviors. If you look at a child on the psychosocial development scale, so a Black child doing something is more apt to get suspended or penalized in some way than a white child doing the same thing. Documented cases of this, and parents really feeling empowered during COVID to say, my child doesn't have to do this anymore, but also hearing in these Zoom classrooms how their child is being talked to, seeing how the teacher fails to communicate with their child in a way that's nurturing. And so being home during COVID allowed parents to really see behind the scenes and what's happening in these classrooms as well. And so all of these factors really impacted parents making the decision to homeschool within these past 2 years.
Okay. And Dr. Connally, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion look like in public school?
So I think anywhere, right? Diversity is just the gathering of differences, right? We talk about race, ethnicity, religion, your thought process, age, right? So diversity is just gathering of differences. That's the first step. Right? There's a great book called Where Are All the Black Kids Sitting in the Cafeteria? Because we know even in diverse schools, there are segregations, right? There's systemic segregations, and then there's self-segregated. And so inclusion is ensuring that everyone has a voice at the table, right? To me, equity is about humanity. If we all treated each other the way that we should, we wouldn't have an equity issue, right? And the truth of the matter is the problem is we have a humanity issue. And so diversity simply means differences, and inclusion means bringing everybody to the table. And when we empower, especially young people, to have a voice, right? And so Dr. Ali Coleman just spoke about how teachers treat our young people. I saw the Woman King this weekend. It was mind blowing. And the revelation I got is that systems don't often recognize the complexities of Black women. Right? The pain that we go through, the struggle that we have. And this trickles down to our girls. We have the pleasure in my district of working with Dr. Jamaal Blake, who wrote Girlhood Interrupted. And so Black girls in schools, especially Black girls, are treated more like they're more sexualized. They are perceived as being older, and they really counter violence. There's a great video out about Let Her Learn. And we see in that video is there's a girl who's refusing to get out of her seat. And she's sitting in her seat, she's refusing to get out. And a police officer comes in and drags her out of the classroom by her hair for sitting in a seat. Another young lady, her hair was cut because she was playing with her beads. right? And so how the complexities of Black girls and women, especially when we show up in school spaces and all systems. So diversity means getting together, inclusion means voice at the table, and equity means, this is what I said, humanity. Numbers don't lie, right? Now you can manipulate the narrative to say what you want to say, but numbers don't lie. Historically, Black people have been suspended in schools more times than their white counterparts. So herein lies the problem. Daniel Lucen is, if you ever Google him, he does a lot of work. And he talks about really there's two reasons that, there's two lanes. So white students often get suspended for objective reasons. They threw something in the cafeteria, there was a fight, there was graffiti. Black students often get suspended for subjective reasons. They were disrespectful, they were loud, they were insubordinate. And those things mean different things to different people. For example, if I ask any 14-year-old to get up and move their seat, they will do it in the time it takes me to run to the store and come back, because they're 14 years old, and that's what 14-year-old students do, whatever race you are. If I ask you to move away from your peer and you don't want to, you will take your time. Doesn't mean that student's being insubordinate, right? What is respect? Respect means different things to different people. In my mother's house, you cannot suck your teeth. That is disrespectful, and you may find them on the floor. However, in my grandmother's house on my father's side, you can suck your teeth all day. Matter of fact, we're Cuban. We don't, I see Aguelo gay, right? We literally speak by sucking our teeth, right? And so what is respect? And that's so subjective. When I see respect on a board, when I walk in a classroom, I say to a teacher, what does that mean to you? And then I go to the nearest kid, I said, what does that mean to you? And it's almost always two different things. And so how can we expect our children to follow the rules when we're not clear what the rules are ourselves, right? And we don't have the same cultural nuances around rules. I was raised in a home where I have an African-American mother and an Afro-Cuban father. Everybody that is 5 years older than me has a title. Reverend, doctor, miss, auntie. And if you're 5 years older than me, even if you're my cousin, you have a title, right? I literally have cousins that I call cousin, Beth, because that's disrespectful in my household, but that might not be disrespectful in your household. So diversity, coming together of differences, inclusion, everybody has a voice at the table, and equity is giving everybody what they need to be successful.
And can we just call everything, that beautiful description that you just gave, Dr. Connally, that's culture. And I love, because that is what gets lost in this conversation about culture that always seems to revolve around, first of all, that looks at Black people as a monolith. I love the fact that you identify all of the different identities within your Black identity, that it is not just, you're not just African-American, you're Afro-Cuban, and then even breaking it down fuller as to what that home culture looks like, because that is what gets lost in these conversations when we even are talking about Black children, when we're talking about cultural competency. And the cultural competency that we're often talking about really is Black and white, where it should also take into consideration all of these things that you're talking about regarding the psychosocial process of development and youth development, and the very real issue of adultism that so many of us implements in our interactions with young people, which creates an additional barrier of us being able to serve young people the best way that we can. So I appreciate you talking about that, and just in your response, the many layers of this Black experience, because it is not identical across the board.
Let me ask, Khadijah, now, listening to Dr. Connally talking about diversity, equality, and inclusion, what are some of the negative and positive aspects of homeschooling? Do you lose some of that because you're not with a bunch of other students? You don't have the interaction. Do you lose some of that?
It's so interesting because this is a very common question that is often asked because when folks are even considering homeschooling, it's through the lens of what we know traditional schooling to be. All of us have been in traditional school spaces. And so we think of homeschooling as basically this classroom in our house with maybe a whiteboard or a chalkboard. The mother or father is now the teacher, and we're talking at the children. And so what I tell folks is first get that idea out of your mind, because that is not normative when we are even thinking about homeschooling. Really, it's about the parent being the lead curator of this experience, even if the children are engaged in different aspects or types of schooling at home, from unschooling. I know you've heard all these terms: unschooling, deschooling, the different methods, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, all of these things make it so that it then becomes a unique experience for the family at hand. So just like I said, there's no Black experience. We're not a monolith. Diversity is within our community as well. The same can be said with homeschooling. And so when we even are talking about the challenges and the successes, it's really relative to the family. But one of the first challenges for all people deciding that they want to homeschool is really addressing what are those ideas as a parent that you have about learning and education. The book that you see right here, Homeschooling Black Children in the U.S., is actually, I was offered a book deal for my dissertation, but I decided I wanted to do an anthology of voices from different homeschoolers, because when I was doing my own dissertation, there was such limited research on Black homeschooling. And there definitely was a limited, I don't think I found anything where they were interviewing the children themselves. And so that's why my dissertation, I had eight children in my study who were being homeschooled and dual enrolled. So they were able to draw from their homeschooling experiences to explain what led to them being successful in college, because they were in both high school and college. And so when we even are talking about learning and we're talking about these successes, we really as parents have to think about what are our ideas of education, and what do we see our role as being the curator, but also the child as being the co-facilitator in this learning experience. And I will say that I have a group, Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars has a resource group on Facebook, and we have over 3,000 members. And whenever someone comes into this group new, one of the, every week we'll get, how do I start? I want to homeschool my child. How do I start? Where do I start? What is this, right? So folks need to first know that every state in the United States has different policies around homeschooling. So I'm in Maryland. I know Reverend Dr. Lane introduced me as being in DC. I'm actually in the suburb of Washington, DC. And so I was born in DC, but I live in Maryland, and Maryland has a different homeschool policy than Virginia, which is 10 minutes away from me, from DC, which is 10 minutes away from me in the other direction, right? And so that's usually the first step, what families have to do. What is the policy in your state for you to be considered compliant? But because there's a policy does not mean that that is dictating what transpires during your homeschooling practice. And what many families or parents have trouble doing is reconciling this understanding of what education and learning is with this idea of compliance, and also this fear of not wanting to jack up your kids and them not having any future because you don't know every subject, because you believe that as the parent leading or curating this experience that you're responsible for teaching every subject, which is not the case. And so what I would say, because this is the biggest challenge, is I would encourage people to do their research, not the type of research I did, doctoral level. I'm talking about a Google search, finding out what are some resources that exist, finding spaces where other homeschooling families are, where you can ask questions, and seeing what precedent is. Understanding that homeschooling can look uniquely how your family needs, but what are your family needs? Who is your child as a learner? When was the last time you had a conversation with your child about what their interests are, you really understanding what their strengths are, understanding what kind of environment they thrive in intellectually? How do they demonstrate their intellectual curiosity? And many parents find that these are things that they've really left to the school to interpret, to assess, to determine, and they don't have a relationship with their child where they know these things immediately. And so this is the first step before anything else, is who is your child as a learner? First of all, you know, a child, many of our children are labeled in schools with having deficiencies in learning, when a lot of these things are the children responding to a method of facilitation and also the environment. I know I am a very sensitive person to sound. I don't like certain environments. I can feel a vibe and I can articulate when things are off because I have certain set of communication skills. A lot of children do not have these skills. And so how it shows up in the school, very similar to what Dr. Connally was already saying, is that when a child doesn't respond in a way that's considered respectful or considered compliant, then they then become the one that is labeled as having some type of deficiency. So what a lot of parents are finding out as they turn to homeschooling is that these deficiencies that they were told about their child don't really exist when they have control about the environment and when they develop the skills and the tools to support their child and their specific needs to learn and to thrive. And so a lot of parents are finding now that their children are thriving in a homeschool environment because they as parents are able to provide these things that were never offered, or they were told things about their children that weren't necessarily the truth. And so in answer to this long-winded answer to your question, AJ, is that even the way that we think about challenges and successes is very relative when we then are taking the reins of this educational pathway. And I love telling parents, you are the curator of this learning experience, but that does not mean that you are the facilitator of everything that needs to happen. My daughter will tell you that in a heartbeat, I have gotten other resources when it comes. My mother was a mathematician. I am not a math teacher. I could probably teach every subject, but I have not, because those of us who are parents also know that our children are not going to listen to everything coming from us. I am a performer. I have written books, and my daughter has never been impressed with any of that. So when it came to certain things that she was interested in, right, I see Adelaide raising her hand. When it came to things that my daughter was interested in, and I knew that I had the competency, I knew that it wouldn't be as attractive if it came from me. And so those are the moments where I maybe had someone I found a class for her, or I hired a tutor, or signed her up for a workshop. And those are the things that you are learning about your child, how they respond to you, what they find useful. My daughter never has been impressed with me. Now she's in college. She got $500,000, over $600,000 worth of scholarship offers to go to about 19 schools, and she chose the University of San Francisco. This is her second year. And she tells me now, she said, and she'll ask me, Mommy, do you know this person? So now she thinks I know everybody. Before she didn't care. Now she thinks I'm famous and I know everybody, because she went away to school. And when folks found out the things that I did, or who I am, or the things that she's done while being homeschooled, and they're like, whoa, they're so impressed. Now it's like, oh, okay, I really had an experience there. So these are the kinds of things that can become highlights for people who engage in homeschooling.
I want to add, I was looking in Dr. Connally, phrases that we were talking about, behavior issue, phrases that caught my attention were therapeutic crisis intervention and positive behavioral intervention and support. And I wanted to give you a chance to speak to that. What does that mean? And how does that apply to our children?
If I could just jump on what my sister said a minute ago.
Absolutely, absolutely.
About schools expecting children to conform to what if you think of a model student, it's not smart, it's not the smartest kid in the class. It's the kid who's most compliant. right? If you think about what a school looks like, you walk in the morning, you hear, take off your hat, take off your headphones, get in line, right? It's all about compliance. It's not really about, you know, that's why I talk about a lot about culturally responsive pedagogy, because it's not just about curriculum, which is what you teach, instruction, which is how you teach, but it's that interaction. If I said to everybody on the stream, think about your most favorite teacher, right? Tell me what they did to make you feel like you're the most favorite teacher. Most people, it would have nothing to do with instruction. Nobody remembers sine, cosine, tangent from ninth grade algebra, right? But you remember that that math teacher believed in you, or the science teacher trusted you, or they honored you in some way. Rita Pearson said, children don't learn from people they don't like, right? And it's so important to understand, like, so my uncle's wife, my aunt homeschooled her 3 children, and we all thought she was crazy. These are literally the most brilliant kids who are just articulate and engaging. And we go to Texas every year as a family. So one year they decided they're going to drive to Texas. And I said, why are you driving to Texas? So whatever unit they were in homeschool, right, because they can do it over the summer because they're with their kids, they had these stops on the way to explain the lesson. And that's how learning works, right? So I love sports. I played basketball. I led in 3 sports. Basketball was my main sport. And it didn't matter how cold it was outside. I grew up in School Street. I would shovel the basketball court, right? I was so engaged in learning how to be perfect in this sport, or how to grow in this sport. And so what if we made learning like that for all of our children? Right. And the other thing she said is we tend to think of learning in traditional schools. When we learn everything else we learn in life does not look like a school classroom. Right. Just think about the things that you're really good at. So I have a friend, she's trying to get me into like planting. I don't have the skill. Right. I like watching her. Yeah, she's great at it. My boss is trying to teach me golf. I'm a softball player. I want to choke up the bat. I don't want to do this. Right. This is uncomfortable. And so think about everything you ever really learned in life, and it was not about traditional teaching. It just wasn't. And so I just wanted to say that. Yeah. So I'm sorry, AJ. What was your question?
So we were talking about how our kids are looked at with behavioral problems, and a couple of things that popped out to me was therapeutic crisis intervention and positive behavioral intervention and support. What is that, and how does that apply to our children?
Yeah, so there are 2 different things. So therapeutic crisis intervention is when somebody is in a crisis, right, and how you engage them. And positive behavior interventions and supports is basically telling people, it's the sandwich model. You tell people that they do good most of the time. So when you have to correct them, you already have enough money in the bank that it's okay. Right? So I'll start with what I call TCI, therapeutic crisis and events. And so when you are having a conversation, and we've probably all done this, right? With a friend, your parents, significant other, and you are passionate about something, the voices elevate, what begins to happen is the more emotional you get, the less oxygen gets to your brain. The problem is when the child is going through that same motion, less oxygen gets to the student's brain. And so if you're yelling at me, I only hear 1 in every 7 words.
Wow.
If you're upset and I'm upset, I only hear 1 in every 14 words. So about thinking kind. That's what it sounds like. Right? So you're telling the kids to sit down, but they can't hear that because all they hear is thinking from TCI. That doesn't make sense. Right? 7% of what you actually say to people, your words, 7% of your words they consume. The rest is your body language and your tone of voice. If you don't believe me, go to a baby. I have a nephew, he's the most amazing kid ever in the history of the world, right? So I go to him when he's 3 months old. His name is Caleb. He's just a fun baby. He's like, I'm here to have fun. And I go, Caleb, you're the ugliest baby in the world. You are so ugly. And Caleb's laughing and he's, like, I love you, auntie. Like, right. And I'm just like, you are so ugly. It's disgusting. Right. And then my brother walks in. He's like, what are you saying to my kid? The kid starts crying. That's reality, right? Tone of voice. And I said, look, Matthew, you're making the kid cry. What's wrong with you? Right? Tone of voice and And body language says everything when you're engaging with somebody. And so therapeutic crisis intervention says when the child's in crisis or the person's in crisis, what we have to do is to be the best version of ourselves, the calmest version of ourselves. I used to be a lifeguard. They tell you to go in. If you save somebody, you never address them from the front because the person's trying to survive. So they'll push you down to try to get up. You always grab them from the back, right? Because they're in survival mode. Kids in crisis are in survival mode. And so sometimes I'm about 5'8", I'm a little taller than the average woman. So sometimes I sit down, if it's elementary school, I sit down in a chair. So I'm closer to their height. I put my hands on my lap and I just start taking deep breaths. And then the kid usually is like, what are you doing? I'm just like listening. And then the kid is like, I'm really upset. I'm like, the teacher did this. And then we just bring the whole situation back down, right? And so that's TCI. Public positive interventions and supports is just that. We often in schools tell kids what they do wrong. We do not tell kids what they do right.
Absolutely.
So we are not explicit when we tell kids what they do right. So we'll say, good job. And the kid is like, which thing that I did was a good job? I don't know, right? And so we have to be explicit. Great job sitting down. When I was an assistant principal, I had 300 kids every single year, 300 different kids. And so I would make it my business to call the home of every single kid when they did something right. I don't care if they helped a friend. I don't care if they sat in the cafeteria. Some kids didn't get called to November, but every single kid got a good home. You know what it's like to be a parent on the phone with the school that's not calling you because your kid did something wrong, especially when you're always the parent that is called. I called my mother. I said, hey, how are you? She's like, yeah. I said, John Smith, I'm here to call you. My name is Dr. Coleman. I'm here to call you about John Smith. What did he do? I said, no. I said, John Smith, somebody dropped all of their books. And John Smith helped them pick up their books. I said, I watched him. When he went to class, the teacher said, go get a pass. He didn't react. He just came to my office. So I didn't even give him a pass. I was his pass. I walked into class and said, John Smith was being a good Samaritan. So the mother said, my kid? I said, yeah. And that kid came to school the next day and said, Dr. Connally, nobody in this building believes in me. I said, I do. He said, when I have a hard time, I'm gonna come to you. I said, absolutely. I had a whole little John Smith corner, bean bags, stress balls, you know. Now let me just, long story short, this kid goes to UAlbany, blows it out of the water, goes to George Washington for his master's in social work. He hits me up on Facebook. He's like, Dr. Connally, can you come down to George Washington? I said, why? What'd you do? Right? Because I'm socialized to think the same thing. We're all socialized. He said, I'm graduating valedictorian. I said, John Smith. I said, I'll be there. I sat in the front. His mother was very sick. His mother couldn't come, right? I was on FaceTime with her the whole time. I said, John Smith, wow. If kids in school had one person that believed in them, it can literally change the trajectory of their life. Let me tell you why that's important. Because that's human capital that we as a society will give up if we don't engage those. Imagine President Barack Obama in third grade had a reading problem. What if his reading teacher was like, you know what? You're not worth it. You're not worth it. We would not have President Obama today. Teachers make a difference.
Absolutely.
That was
my next
beautiful.
question. Okay. That was. What would you say are the best practices for educating Black and brown children? And y'all can both answer this question.
I think Dr. Connally explained in a nutshell, really, just the way that we relate to our children, the way that, when we start to remove these punitive barriers, and it really starts with us as parents. This is what I found so fascinating with this question, and just really all educational research and discussions always seem to revolve around the adults in terms of coming up with the solutions, but never really asking and addressing the children as to what they find to be most helpful, the things that they value. But also when asking the adults, what are the ways that you treat the children like humans instead of making decisions for them? I think, Dr. Connally really, I think what she is explaining to us is something that we don't really address as being something that is a remnant of slavery and enslavement. This idea that Black people, Black children need to be punished severely for any infraction, and something that we as Black parents have taken on in our parenting, this very punitive approach. And that's why it's very easy for a school to call up a parent and speak negative things about the child, and for the parent to just continue the path of corporal response. And so when she's calling a parent and telling them something positive, it triggers, it's like, it's new, because we have for so long held fast to a systemic system of a systemic, historical systemic problem of really castigating anything that our children do as being wrong. What she spoke of earlier, our young women, our young girls look adultified and sexualized. When she was speaking earlier, and then just now I was thinking about, so my daughter, I homeschooled her off and on for 13 years. So she was in public school system for 6 years and out for 6 years. And in high school, middle school, because I homeschooled her completely for high school and some years in elementary school. And she went to performing arts school for 7th and 8th grade. And I will never forget getting a call from one of her teachers, 7th or 8th grade. And the teacher is on the phone with me. I'm at work now, telling me that my daughter was writing a note where she used the word nasty. So I said, nasty what? And she was like, she used the word nasty. This woman was behaving as if my daughter had called someone a nasty MF, talking about her private parts and all kinds. So what was the context for nasty? And it was really like someone was having a nasty day. So I went in on this teacher, and I will not repeat what I said, but I was horrified. I was angry. And I articulated that to her, that never in your life are you to sexualize anything that my daughter is saying if you're not clear on the connotation. You cannot tell me what exactly is the context in which you're sharing this information. And then I had her read it to me for her to find out that it was not something sexual at all. And if it was her anger of the fact that my daughter's writing during her class, where she created this narrative about my daughter. She later apologized to me, but that I feel that if I wasn't the type of parent to push back and to address this, then who knows, how many times has this happened with our children? I was horrified. And I think about that often because my daughter is a writer. So my daughter, in 4th grade, the teacher asked me to ask her to stop writing because it distracts the other students, because she would finish her tests and her schoolwork earlier than the other kids so she could pull out her journal and write. The teacher, rather than finding that being something of value and to model for the other students, was asking me, called a parent conference to ask me to ask her to stop writing and to put her head down if she finishes her work. And this is the type of environment that led me to homeschooling. And then when I asked the teacher, is it easier for me to tell her to not write than it is for you to create a writing corner or to create some type of activity which encourages the other children to finish their work so they can write too? And for her to say, you know what? So when we are even talking about, and I have to say, that in one instance it was a white teacher, in one instance it was a Black teacher. So I want to get away from the fact that when I speak of institutional racism or systemic racism, that we're talking about the color of the skin of the instructor, because it's a mindset and it's something that's inherent in the way that our teachers are taught and the ways that they facilitate, regardless of the color of their skin. And so all of these things that Dr. Connally is speaking of refers to this human quality that she speaks of, but also addresses the adultism that we are raised to believe is normative and acceptable. I got trained in 2006 in a theory called Advancing Youth Development Theory. At the time, I was working at Covenant House, Washington, and the executive director was Vincent Gray, who many know as being the mayor, the former mayor of Washington, D.C. Excellent administrator, because he made all of us get trained in this theory, which the undergirding beliefs is that if we are to provide opportunities for young people, that we must have in place the services and the supports in place for them to be able to recognize the opportunities. It also requires there be a competency, a set of competency indicators that facilitators or people working with young people must have in order to successfully be able to accelerate youth, or not accelerate, but just promote positive youth development, because young people are going to develop whether we like it or not. But positive youth development is what we are able to facilitate as youth workers, whether we're teachers, after school workers, or what have you. And I find that theory has been not only helpful for when I work with young people, but also helpful as a parent, because I realize if there's any opportunity that I want my child or the children I'm working with to enjoy, I have to make sure that I have the services and the supports in place for them to be able to enjoy this opportunity. And I also must confront my own inherent adultism in recognizing that they, as young people, want the opportunity to express, and a whole set of indicators that indicate that they are enjoying this opportunity.
AJ, I want to just jump in here for just a second. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali Coleman. Someone is asking, is it Advancing Youth Development Theory? Is that the name of the theory? Do we have a couple of people asking? Okay, yes, that is correct.
A.Y.D, yes.
Okay, A.Y.D, thank you. And we have 15 minutes, I think, before we're expecting Congressman Bowman. So I want to make sure that we get as many of these questions as we can that have been put in the chat answered. And one of them is a question that I actually had also, is I would love for you all, both of you, or maybe just one of you, to weigh in on this, the charter schools, homeschooling, these movements that actually take students out of public school. And we do, I know, have folks who actually come out against charter schools because they say that, you know, for all of the things that does. So what I would like to do is just briefly ask you, Dr. Connally, what's your stand on there, and what, you know, what's good about it, what's bad about it in terms of educating our kids?
Yeah, so I'm gonna just be honest. I am a promoter of public institutions. I think that when I heard, I'm sorry, her name escapes me, sure, 1619. Talk about how she sends her child to public schools because she's a firm believer in public institutions. And I think when we move away from our public institutions and we begin to privatize them, there's always a benefit and a cost analysis. So in New York State, we do not privatize our jails, and I will always advocate for that, because we understand that systemically, if you are making money off of a group of people, you are not moving to make, you know, to help those people grow into the best versions of themselves. So I'm just going to say I am a firm believer in public institutions. Also, all of my research will say that charter schools actually have higher rates of discrimination and bias than public schools, because they're not regulated by the same systems. The other thing about charter schools is charter schools can pick who chooses to go to charter schools. So if you're in a public school and you get suspended 5 times, then you stay in that public school. They might move you to another public school or an alternative program, but that's going to take a while. A charter school can just send you back to the district that paid for you. So I'm going to be honest, I am a firm believer in our public institutions, and my studies have shown that there's more discrimination, especially around hair, ironically, in private and charter schools than in public schools.
Did you say hair?
Yes.
Yeah, hair discrimination.
Yes. Okay.
So in 2018, New York State adopted the Crown Act, which literally means that the hair that naturally grows out of my head, I can wear in any way in a school, which is a countermeasure to the Tigman law. So the Tigman law was in the 1800s, where Black women could not wear their hair natural, and they had to wrap it up because it became too attractive to white men. So the law said, again, you cannot wear your hair natural. The problem is they began, Black women, they began to create these beautiful wraps which was just as attractive to their hair. So the Tigman law has never gone away. The Crown Act countered the Tigman law, which was still a national law in the books. Unfortunately, only 16 states actually have the Crown Act.
Hmm.
Thank you. I didn't know that. I thought that was nationally recognized law. I didn't know that. Thank you. So how do we make these policies, universal? And I know this is a huge question. We're not going to be able to answer that in 10 minutes or 10 years probably, but the best practices for educating Black and brown children are best practices for probably educating all children, but would require, eradicating systemic racism and implicit bias and the whole nine. But there are some things that can be done. How do we do that and empower parents?
Well, I'm of the belief that everything that we do is political. I come from a family. My great grandparents both were very influential in the South. They created many schools. What do we call the schools? Rosenwald Schools, that were sponsored by the white philanthropist Rosenwald. Many people are familiar with Rosenwald, his work with Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington really brought him into communities in places, Black communities where they wanted schools. Rosenwald actually came up with the concept of matched funds. So for those of us in nonprofit, well, we know we're applying for grants, but we have to demonstrate that we want 40,000, but we got to demonstrate we already have 40,000. That really is what came out of the building of these Rosenwald schools throughout the South. And so my grandparents were public school teachers. My mother was a math and science public school teacher. And so my child was in public school. So I see the value of there being public education, a public education system. But when I say that everything is political, what I don't think that we recognize is the impact that we can have in terms of what that public education system looks like. But I'm not one for having our children have to experiment or be experimented on until we get it right. And that had a lot to do with me pulling my daughter out initially, and then her asking, can she return to homeschool for high school after her experiences in middle school? And it's so interesting that you bring up the Crown Act, Dr. Connally, because in this public school, middle school she was in, and it was very unique in our county because most of the public schools in our county have dress codes, uniforms. This public school is one of the few that didn't have that, but they restricted her from wearing head wraps because when she started wearing head wraps, then all the other kids started wearing head wraps. And then they were like, oh no, because they didn't like how they looked. And this type of just infringement on their personal expression for no other reason other than the adults didn't like how it looked. And these are the types of things when we talk about adultism, when we talk about the way that we treat children. There's a historian by the name of Stacey Patton who has written a book, does a lot of research. I think she has a book coming out, but she has a book called Spare the Rod, and talks about just the historical influences on how we treat our Black children, particularly around physical punishment, but that all of this really comes from a culture of education not really being our rights in the same capacity. And so when I think of public schools and when I think of charter schools, the difference may be that a community, a group of people may have decided that they want this charter school and they get public funds, but for the most part, some of the same things are inherent in these traditional school spaces, which really take away agency from the children, but also are not founded in a lot of these principles that Dr. Connally talked about in terms of just these humane ways that we engage with young people. And a lot of people who are turning to homeschooling are really being confronted with, you would think it's the academic aspect of it, but it really becomes about these ways that we have been taught to relate and to treat each other. as Black people, as our children? What is the right, what is that legacy of engagement and relationship that we have with each other, from the tone of our voice, from the ways that the trust that we have with our young people, because then that influences the ways that we look at learning. So if we think that trust and building trust among the people in our family is of value, then the things that we're going to engage them in along this learning journey are going to include things that build that trust quota, or the ability to have independence, so that someone can trust that when you're out of sight, that you're doing the right thing, whatever that may be. And so I know that with my daughter, she is very into plants. That is not my ministry. I am not that person. And so she really took it upon herself, self-directed in that way. But plants became then a math lesson, became a lesson on, it eventually led to her getting a job in a nursery. And these are the kinds of things that you don't necessarily find in traditional school settings, where children are trusted to engage in independent opportunities to learn, and for those things to be applied to life skills. So I don't think that we can have one set phrase on how to transition the educational landscape to one where it's more holistic, because I think it's really individual. But I think if we can take away the barriers and we really address this idea of adultism, I think that is something that really harms the ways that we engage with students in these school systems.
Now, let me ask both of you, for people that might want to get in touch with you, the websites, how they follow you on social media, any books or stuff that you have out that you want to promote. I want to give both of y'all a chance.
Yeah, I put my website in the chat. I'm Dr. Alexandria Connally on Facebook. I think Dr. Connally on Twitter. I just wanted to quickly answer that question. Okay. How do we dismiss? One simple answer: vote. Go out and vote. Vote for people who care about this. And I just wanted to take a minute. I'm sorry, I just opened my screen up. I did not see. I always respect the elders, my mentors. I just wanted to say it's a pleasure and an honor to be in the presence of the great David Billings and Marjorie Billings. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for giving those two a shout out. Also wanted to say that the person you were referring to with the 1619 project, we all know Dr. Nicole Hannah-Jones. Absolutely.
Yes.
We also want to make sure that we invite you guys to give any last words, like what are some calls to action? I got that, definitely voting. And you said, Dr. Connally, C.R.E.A.D.live, right, is yours, C.R.E.A.D.live, all right?
Yes.
And Dr. Coleman, what is your website address, just so I can say it on air, or you can say it?
I put in the chat blackfamilyhomeschool.org, where you can learn more about Black family homeschool educators and scholars. We really are catering to Black families who would like to be connected to research that may come up. We also have an annual teach-in that takes place during the summer that's virtual, where different homeschool parents and researchers share information around homeschooling, typically their own experiences, and how they grew from being in traditional school spaces to then transitioning to homeschooling. And my website is khadijahalicoleman.com. And there's a hyphen, because my last name is Ali Coleman, so it's ALI-COLEMAN.
Okay. Absolutely. I want to thank both of y'all for your time, for this great conversation. This is the type of thing that I have a lot more questions. We could have had y'all both talk for another hour each, but I thank you for sharing all that you do and for doing all that you do. Definitely.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure meeting you as well, Dr. Connally, and it was great to be here.
Dr. Ali Coleman, I'll be in DC next week, so I'll look you up.
Oh, wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the both of you. I know, Dr. Ali Coleman, you have to sign off. Dr. Connally, if you can hang around. I do see that Congressman Bowman has joined us, and I'm, all right, he'll be with us shortly. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali Coleman. Really, it's been a joy, and thank you for what you are providing for our Black parents and Black children. This is extraordinarily powerful work. Look forward to having you back, okay?
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And I just wanted to say, you know, you were talking about the way we talk to our children and reaffirming them. You know, I went to high school in Mount Vernon. A lot of my classmates are dead or in jail and did double-digit jail terms. And what kept me from that was a lot of people who saw something in me. Youth pastors of churches I didn't even go to. You know what I mean? I was like, I belonged to like 3, 4 different youth ministries. I wasn't a member of none of their churches. And it was like an open door. One of them had Grace Baptist had a youth building. I'd go in there anytime, play pool or whatever. It was just, you know, they always saw something in me. They invested something in me. They spoke to me. Like, I don't know what it was they saw in me, but I have to credit them for the reason, you know, I didn't go the way some of my classmates did, especially in a difficult time when you're trying to find yourself. My parents broke up. You know, I thought it was my fault and the whole nine. I went from Long Island back to Mount Vernon. And it was like, you know, you're really trying to figure it out. And I was doing everything I could to try to mess it up. But there were people who would not give up on me. And the reason I'm doing some of the work I'm doing now, I have to credit all of them. So it is very important what you say to people and invest in positivity into people. I mean, I'm a example of that. So I just want to throw that out there. It's very important.
Yeah, Dr. Connally, you wear a lot of hats.
Absolutely.
A lot of hats. So one of them is restorative practitioner. And maybe you can talk about that for a moment and its role in schools and how that is effective in terms of creating equity.
Yeah, so just to give you a history, restorative justice started in New Zealand. So I flew to New Zealand to figure out how does this work. And natives in New Zealand are like Black people in America, right? And so they were having a battle between white and natives. And these natives were going to jail for, sometimes they committed crimes, sometimes they didn't, just like here in America. But what they did that was different was they began to hold the people who are in prison accountable to the person that they hurt. Now, it's one thing to say something like this is where technology goes wrong, right? We're really tough behind the screen. You can say anything on Facebook, but then when I have to see you, it's a different feel. And so that's the whole notion of restorative practices, right? It's not suspensions say to people, you misbehaved in the community and now we're putting you out of the community. Restorative practice is saying you misbehaved in the community and now you're responsible to the community to restore that. Now, kids are amazing because I had a student who said the N-word and they brought them to me. I was the assistant principal and he was a Latino boy and he was explaining that he didn't mean to say it and this whole thing, right? First of all, let's stop asking kids why they did what they did. They don't know. Their frontal lobes are not developed. 12-year-old boys hit the exit sign because they're 12-year-old boys. Just tell them not to do it. Don't try to have a conversation with them. They don't know. So I said, listen, stop. How are you going to walk back into your classroom and look at students who look like me and expect you to trust them? And he began to cry because that was not his intention. And so he's like, suspend me for 15 days. And I was just like, let's just calm down, right? Kids give themselves consequences way more than we do. And so we began to do research together on why he shouldn't use the N-word. And he put this beautiful presentation together. And I suggested that he do it for that class. He decided he needed to do it for the 8th grade. It was 8th grade at the time, because this was so important. Everybody needs to know this, Dr. Connally. Everybody needs to know this. And so this young man presented in front of the 8th grade class. And you can imagine public speaking for adults in front of children are hard. This young man, I said, you want to stand with you? He said, no, I have to do this on my own. He said, I have to store these relationships. And when he was done, his class gave him a standing ovation. And what I began to hear is a decrease in all bad language. So not just the N-word, but I heard less curses in the hallway, and how children began to speak to each other was different. And so when you begin to use the community and hold people accountable to what you need to do in the community, it's very different, right? So punishment is what we have in this moment, right? The problem with punishment is when the authority goes away, we go back. Okay, I see you guys don't believe me. You're driving down the highway, you're doing 55. Then you're doing 65, then you're doing 75. Then you see the police officer and you slow down. And then you see that you're clear and you speed back up, right? That's punishment, right? Now, restorative practices, when we all go out to eat together, right? We're at a picnic and somebody leaves garbage on the park. And we say to the person, are you gonna leave this here? And the person's like, oh, no, I was just coming back. They were gonna leave it there, right? Because now they're responsible to us. So now we left a clean park because as a collective, this was important to us. There are no park police saying, pick up the garbage. And relationships make a difference. Relationships make a difference. You work hard for the people. If you ever had a really great boss, my superintendent called me, I was in the Bahamas. He said, can you jump on Zoom? We're at a board meeting. I said, Doc, he said, I'll buy you lunch. It comes with, I'm on an exclusive resort. It comes with the room, right? But of course I jumped on because relationships matter. And if we all begin to really care about one another in a way that we begin to build relationships, then that's all we would need. Last story, and I'll stop. I had a sixth grader. He's running down the hallway. He's in the exercise. So I had a teacher say, why are you hitting the exercise? And this kid is sitting here like, I have no idea. I just went with it, right? So he comes down the next day and punishment. He doesn't see the teacher. He hits the exercise. I said, come here, let me talk to you. He's like, oh. I said, do you love Dr. Connally? He's like, yeah, of course, we love Dr. Connally. I said, listen, you're going to hit the exercise one day. You're going to slip, you're going to fall and hit your head. And I got to call your mother, and your mother's going to yell at me, and I'm going to cry. Do you want Dr. Connally to cry? And he's like, wait, what? No, I don't want you to cry. I said, then don't hit the exercise. He said, okay. This kid has never hit the exercise, right? Not only that, there's a bunch of kids running down the hall. He grabs one of them. He said, no, don't hit the exercise. Why? We don't want Dr. Connally to cry. The kids are like, what? Dr. Connally will cry because they exercise. They were like, oh, okay, we don't want Dr. Connally to cry. They didn't hear the story, but the relationship matters.
You remind me of a friend who used to be on my show, Cynthia Turnquest Jones. Y'all have a lot of the same mannerisms when you talk, and she's very passionate about education too. And I think y'all got to know each other because y'all have a lot of the same mannerisms. Like that. Yeah. Shout out to Cynthia.
So, and thank you, Dr. Connally, for staying on. Congressman Bowman is on a last-minute virtual call, so he will be with us as soon as he can. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for that. Dr. Connally, one of the things that you shared when we first met was that story about the exit sign, and how when anything happens in your school, you can tell the kids we're going to have a circle, or they even know. They just start getting the chairs to create the circle. Kids love these circles. It helps them to get a relationship. It helps them to express. They can be heard. They get to practice accountability. They get restored into the community. There's no shame, right? This is such a wonderful thing that's now being put into a lot of schools. I want you to take this moment to talk about anything else that you feel, that as an audience of mostly white people who are here today, right, who are very, very committed and in lifting up the voices of Black people, but also to dismantling some of the systemic racism that they're seeing now. What is the call to action? Is there anything else that you feel needs to be lifted up here in terms of best practices around educating Black and brown kids?
Vote.
And vote is it. Okay, thank you.
I'll tell you why.
I'm good with that.
I tell you why, because the people in power make policies that can either elevate or hurt our kids, right? And I don't expect white people to know what happens in my community. So I have, listen, we called Chuck Schumer in. We said, listen, we have a maternal death rate issue in this country. We want to be the pilot to make sure that brown and black women that have EEDs, PhDs, and MDs have a higher maternal death rate than white people with high school diplomas. We want to fix that. Chuck Schumer says, I have no idea this is happening. Of course you don't, right? You live in your white privilege. We appreciate you. He then partnered with us. Not only just gave us money, but came down and said, I believe in this project. When the Senate Majority Leader of the US Senate says, I believe in you, and here is how I'm going to support you, that's important. Because if we had a senator from another state, we wouldn't be able to counter this. And so school boards that have people on them that believe in this work. So in NIAC, my school board believes in this work. And so when I come up with a crazy idea, like, let's have student-led equity teams, they're like, yeah, it'll be an epic fail, but they'll be like, yeah, let's try it. Like, whatever's going to help us, right? I also just want to address something really quickly. Somebody put a great question in the chat. How do we start circles practices when people are accustomed to punishment? Here's the key, right? So Lane Cobb said, when things go wrong in schools, and you notice what she didn't say is when students misbehave in schools, right? But when things go wrong in schools. So we could talk about systems, right? Sometimes we have circles around systems, right? What we need to do better as a school community, kids, adults, everybody. And sometimes we have issues as adults. So really quick story, as a special ed teacher, and I do these, professional developments, go out and do speaking engagements, and my students are on their best behavior when I'm not there. Everybody has a job, they have a protocol, they're amazing. I come back, my principal at the time was just like, your class is the best. So one time I go out and I come back, and my principal says, your students were terrible. I'm like, your students were terrible. Now, what I should have done is walk back in the class and say, guys, what happened yesterday? That's what I should have done. But what I did was, I went and I yelled at my students. And I should have known something was wrong because none of them reacted. They all kind of sat there like, are we being punked? And so I could see my principal running down the hall, and I'm thinking, he's not coming in here, is he? So he comes and he goes, I apologize, it was the wrong class.
Wow.
In that moment defined how I was going to live the rest of my life as an educator. Because all the kids are now sitting there like, So I could have done one of two things. I could have said, you know what, guys, I'm sorry, and moved on, right? But what I would have expected if they did something wrong was to call a circle. And so my kids didn't even wait for me. They just started putting chairs around. They didn't even wait for permission, right? And I could have, and in one moment, I thought, I am the teacher. I am not going to sit in a circle. And then I looked at one of my students who had such tremendous growth from circles, and I sat down. And they told me all how they felt. And my heart was broke. And they said, Dr. Connally, you know us better than that. You believe in us. You trust us. That's why you go out. And I said, okay, how can I restore this? Kids are gracious. How can I restore this relationship? They said, Dr. Connally, we still love you. We appreciate you. And they said, the first step is, in you restore this relationship, is making the playing field even. So when we act up, we do a circle, but when you act up, we know we can call a circle too. I said, all right, but what can I do? And they said, you could clean our desks. Now, you got to understand, I only have 8 kids in my class, and I was meticulous with desk cleaning. Everybody cleaned their desks every day. But their desks were perfect. I was just like, okay, right? So they go to lunch, I clean their desks, straighten it up. And then I went out and I got special stickers and pencils to put on their desks, right? Because in that moment, those children taught me how to be a great leader. Not a great educator, a great leader. And I shared that with them. I shared that with them when they got back. I also made a part of a social studies lesson because at the end of the day, I'm a teacher. We were talking about John F. Kennedy, and so I just kind of linked it all together.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
So AJ, you were talking about book banning on one of your broadcasts recently.
Oh, yes.
And I'm wondering if Dr. Connally has any comments about that. What can we do about that?
Yeah, so what I realized is when you tell kids not to do something, you know what they do?
They do it.
They do it.
That's me. The worst thing you can do is tell me not to do.
So I have kids, you know, who have said, hey, they're looking to ban these books, and they'll contact me on Facebook, you know, or Twitter or IG or Snap and say, hey, Dr. Connally, we see some of the work you're doing in New York, and they're banning books in our schools. I said, yeah, what should we do? We want to read these books. I said, Amazon, buy the book. And they're like, oh, okay. Right. And so and I said, listen, I'll do a book read with you. If you buy a book and you want to read it, I will read it with you. We'll have I don't care if you're not my kid. I don't care if you don't live in New York. We'll have a Zoom. Thank God for Zoom and webinars, and we'll just discuss the book. So I had a bunch of kids from like Ohio, in the Midwest area. They had gotten together, and they read Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I don't know if anybody.
Oh, yes.
The most amazing book, right? And they have a
Absolutely.
kid version. They have a younger person.
Oh, wow.
And this wasn't even a book that was banned, though. That was the funny part. But this kid wanted to read it, and I had about 200 kids on this Zoom talking about this book. Here's the more important thing: a lot of these kids came from impoverished neighborhoods. They look like me, and what we had was 200 kids who were now reading, who had not read before. I see my congressman is on, so I will yield the floor to him.
No, please, Dr. Connally, please continue your point. It will help talk me into whatever remarks I'm going to make. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Good afternoon. Please, Dr. Connally, continue.
So we were just talking about banning books, and I think one thing is if you tell kids not to do something, to do it, and then everybody here probably knows what the second answer that I'm going to say is that you should do. Anybody want to take a guess what I'm going to say? That you should do? What else should you do?
Come on, everybody, unmute and say, everybody unmute the V word. Vote.
Vote.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. So you are listening. Yes, I love it. If
you don't want books banned in your school district, elect people to your school board who will not ban books.
There you go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Connally. Congressman Bowman, thank you so much. I had designs on reading your bio, but I know your time is limited. So if it's okay with you, I would prefer not to read your bio and have you introduce yourself and talk about why you're here today. Thank you so much. And I know AJ is thrilled, and thank you so much, AJ, for inviting Congressman Bowman to join us today. Welcome to Race Talk.
Yes, no, good to be with you. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, I'm Congressman Jamaal Bowman, representing the 16th District, hopefully, of New York. Hopefully everything will go well in the general election, and I'll continue to represent the 16th District. The 16th includes the North Bronx and goes up to White Plains. It used to include more of the North Bronx from Co-op City to Riverdale, but now it is going to include Edenwald and Wakefield and go to White Plains and have everything in between. Prior to coming to Congress, I worked in education for 20 years as an elementary school teacher, high school dean of students and guidance counselor, and middle school principal for 10 and a half years. And I'm here because AJ told me to be here. He didn't tell me what to talk about. He didn't tell me what it was about. He said race talk, and I was like, okay, I'm there. Yeah, no, this is my life's work. You know, this is the work that I tried to do while in education, whether it was in the classroom as a teacher or being a school leader. It's work that is so necessary here in Congress, but also in our district. There's just so much, there's just such a lack of education and lack of understanding and lack of engagement regarding race, particularly regarding anti-Black racism. You know, it's not just, you know, the Ku Klux Klan, you know, riding down the plane in horses, terrorizing people. It is something that, as we all know, has been systemic and lives and breathes in laws that are passed from Congress to state houses to counties to local municipalities. So part of my work in Congress is to continue to be an educator. You know, you never take off that hat. And as an educator, first and foremost, I'm a learner. So I try to learn as much as I can about everything that I can. And then I share that learning with others in the hopes to bring people together and really being a part of transformative change. And I'll say one more thing before I take any questions you may have. But to Dr. Connally's point about the banning of books, you know, what we've seen, and this has been a national coordinated campaign of fear from the Republican Party specifically, and the ultra conservatives, MAGA conservatives, and other people within that party. They have engaged in a national coordinated campaign of fear that has gone into the classrooms in our schools. And that fear is fear of education. Fear if kids and people begin to learn the truth, that they will be less able to be manipulated and controlled and guided by misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. So what we have to do, what's really, really important, is obviously continue to listen and learn and engage, but also to continue to uplift our voices and engage in school board meetings and hold elected officials and leaders at all levels accountable towards raising their voices as well. Because the other side, they are going to continue to be loud and proud and wrong and strong. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about decency. All that stuff is out the window. And if we allow the ether to be consumed by their lies and their misinformation, that will ultimately become the truth in the minds of many people in our community. So when they push, we got to push back. When they fight, we got to fight back. When they raise their voices, we have to raise our voices even louder and really speak truth to power, because the lies will win. I mean, look at the last president. You know, he not only was he a liar, but he was just he just sullied the chair and the office of the president in so many ways. And because he was loud and boisterous and demonstrative, and oh, by the way, a white man, he had more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. So, you know, he, I think, is a clear example of the dangers of allowing racism and sexism and lies and discrimination to occupy the atmosphere without us pushing back.
I have a quick comment and then a question. And you spoke on some of that. You are definitely a true man of the people, and you're definitely not afraid to call out equity and racism when you see it, which is one of the reasons that Black Westchester endorsed you wholeheartedly, proudly endorsed you in the election. And to Dr. Connally's point, when we have elected officials like yourself, we need to get out and vote, Dr. Connally. We need to vote so we can continue to have the things that we need, especially when we talk about education and Black and brown children and stuff like that. What are the issues that you most feel the need to address? What are the issues that you feel most need to be addressed in education right now? And how does the Green New Deal initiative for public schools do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In my opinion, we need a complete transformation of our public school system. Everything from how the school day is structured, to what we focus on during that school day, to the ultimate outcomes we are trying to achieve. You know, our school system is pretty much designed in the same way it was designed in the early 1900s. It hasn't changed very much. And what I would like to see, I would like to see much more focus on culturally responsive education, much more a focus on the arts and enrichment, much more of a focus on project-based learning, and much more, and I think the mission of our schools should be to engage students in the process of self-discovery, because the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about others and the world around you, and the better you could connect with our collective humanity and our collective environment, which I think is critical. Right now, what we have is much of the content is abstract and arbitrary and doesn't really connect with who we are biologically or spiritually as human beings. And at best, it may connect with jobs of the 21st century, but oftentimes we're dropping the ball when it comes to that as well. We're not even connecting to the current jobs of the 21st century. The Green New Deal for public schools is an opportunity to invest in public schools, beginning with those that have been historically underinvested in, like schools in Yonkers and the Bronx and Mount Vernon as well, from a federal standpoint. Finally invest in those schools, but don't just invest to do more of the same. Invest in green infrastructure, so our schools are no longer dependent on fossil fuels. Invest in curriculum that aligns to 21st century competencies and environmental injustices. Create pipelines of educators that start in the communities where the people live, so that teachers from those neighborhoods can work in those schools, and not just teachers, but teachers, assistants, mental health professionals, and the like. And dramatically increase funding for Title I schools, which are schools that are disproportionately low income, and increase funding for schools that serve children with special needs, which is a consistently underfunded area of public education.
What would be your call to action for our audience? How do you want folks to get involved?
Education or everything?
Well, the theme of the show is education, so I mean, let's go with that first.
Well, I mean, so I said we need a revolution in education, and we need transformation in our democracy as well, and we need revolution in terms of our approach to foreign policy as well. I mean, we live on a planet that is dying. The issue of climate change is real, and we have to deal with it very aggressively. It's leading to drought, is leading to famine, it's leading to hunger, is leading to weather events that destroy 1/3 of a country, which is what just happened in Pakistan, right? So there's a call to action around that right there. And connected to that is education, is racial justice, is gender equality, it's all of it. The one thing I would say is, if I had like a single call to action, there's a status quo of paternalism and patriarchy, in particular white patriarchy, that controls the hearts and minds and behaviors of every institution in America. So identifying that and being really clear on that as the problem, that means every elected official and leader in our communities need to be held accountable towards the solution. And what is that solution? It means speaking truth to power, and then putting in policy that uplifts women, uplifts people of color, deals with the issues of economic inequality, big money in politics, climate change. All of the issues that we are faced with are issues that enrich a very small percentage of mostly white men and suppresses everybody else. And when you look at American history, who were the writers of our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence? Who were the workers for the economy, and who were the owners? This is the same thing, right? It's the same group. White male property owners wrote the Constitution, right? Everybody else was secondary. Women, they had rights, blacks were slaves, et cetera, et cetera. That same dynamic exists now. So that, to me, is the enemy. And in order for us to evolve into the democracy and the nation that we want to be, we have to all stand up and push back against that. So it's everything from the mural conversation in Greenberg to the flooding in Pakistan, and everything in between, to Roe v. Wade being overturned. It's all of it. It's all under the umbrella of that problematic thing, which is our colonial, imperialist paternalism and patriarchy.
There you go. How can people reach out to you, find out more about some of the things you're doing, website, social media?
Sure. So yeah. So just go to bowman.house.gov to see the work we're doing on the House on the official side. You know, from my congressional office, you'll see all of the legislation we've introduced, some of our advocacy and some other work. And I'll cover my pin to talk about the campaign side. And you could go to bowmanforcongress.com to see some of the work we're doing on the campaign side. And this is, you know, this is all very, very exciting. This is an exciting time and an exciting work that I'm doing, that I get a chance to do. It's also a scary time because, you know, we're in a vulnerable moment, you know, in this country when we, you know, I was just talking to my chief of staff about this. You know, 3 days after I was sworn in, there was an insurrection on the Capitol. That trauma still lives in my body. Every time I come here, I feel that trauma again. And so considering the insurrection, considering the previous president, considering the Supreme Court, it's a scary time, but it's an exciting time because we all, if we're united, have an opportunity to do some really transformative things.
Absolutely. One of our viewers said, thank you for your commitment and energy. Congressman Bowman, we are honored to have you as our representative.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's, you know, let's keep working. I see many of you, I've met some of you, you all have been doing this work for a very long time. And now, you know, I hope to partner with you on continuing that work because it's necessary. You know, everywhere we turn, you know, we're reminded of just how, you know, how hard things are out there, you know, for so many people. And we could do better and we will do better. So thank you for having me.
And I'll turn it back over to Lane Cobb.
Peace and love.
Congressman. So happy to have you. I hope you come back. All right. We're going to have you back.
100%. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Representative Jamaal Bowman. Thank you very much, Dr. Alexandria Connally. And we are so pleased. We will invite you back as well, Doctor. Keep up the work that you're doing. We will not meet next week, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please join us on October 5th at noon for another courageous conversation about race. Thank you also to my co-host, Mr. A.J. Woodson of Black Westchester Magazine. You can find out information about the magazine and People Before Politics Radio at blackwestchester.com, as well as A.J.'s book, which he will now show you, Black Westchester's Origin Story and How My Faith Was Instrumental in This Great Experiment. It's going like hotcakes. He is all over the place with that book. If you've been enjoying these conversations and would like to put them into action, please join our Race Talk in Action support group for new organizers and activists. You can get more information about that on Eventbrite if you go to Race Talk in Action. If you're on our mailing list, please be sure to check out our learning and development resources that I send out each week. And if you like our programs and would like to support us, you can make a tax-deductible donation at racetalkrevolution.com. We are so grateful to all of you for your love and support. Lastly, if you have topics or speakers that you would like us to feature, please contact me at info@racetalkrevolution.com. You can also reach me at lanecobb.com, because here on Race Talk Revolution, your voice matters. AJ, closing words, if you would, please.
Only word, thank you for the Congressman showing up, and he also did a powerful foreword for the book, so that's another reason for you to get the book. That's it. I thank you for letting me be a part of this great conversation, and thank you to all our guests.
Thank you so much, and I'm just going to put the Eventbrite link in the chat for anybody who wants to join us tomorrow night from 7 to 8:30 for Race Talk in Action. Everyone, take care. God bless you all. Thank you so much to the Race Talk Revolution family. All right, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.